Today, we're digging into something pretty wild. How a storm that looked, kind of minor on paper, ended up becoming a total national catastrophe for Sri Lanka. This is the story of Cyclone Ditwah, and it's this powerful lesson that the real danger, it's not always the wind. And let's be super clear about the impact here. This was not just another storm. We're talking about damage and a loss of life on a scale the country hadn't seen in 20 years. That immediately puts it in a whole different category. Okay, let's talk numbers. The initial estimate for the damage was a staggering $7 billion. To put that in perspective, that's somewhere between 3 and 5% of the entire nation's GDP. I mean, think about it. That's more value wiped out than the country's combined yearly budgets for both healthcare and education. Just gone. So the big question is, how? How did this happen? Well, it all starts with the storm itself, which was really deceptive and kind of hid its true power. And this is where you find the real paradox, the thing we really need to get our heads around. See, on the official charts, Ditwah was just a cyclonic storm. Its winds were only about 75 kilometers per hour. Now, those are not the kind of speeds you expect to cause this level of chaos. But on the ground, for the people, it was a national reckoning. And that human impact, it was just immense. By early December 2025, the numbers were just awful. Over 400 confirmed dead, hundreds more still missing, and nearly 1.5 million people directly affected. That's about 1 out of every 10 people in the entire country. So to figure out this puzzle, we have to stop looking at the wind. The storm's real weapon was water. Let's break down the anatomy of the superflood that Ditwah unleashed. Okay, this next number is it's almost hard to wrap your head around. In a single 24-hour period, an estimated 13 billion cubic meters of rain fell on Sri Lanka. Want some perspective? That flow rate was like the Amazon River at its absolute peak, but all of it was concentrated on an island 100 times smaller. And the ground was already soaked, so that water, it had absolutely nowhere to go. So how does a rainmaking machine like this even form? Well, the recipe was actually surprisingly simple. It all kicked off on November 26th, down in the waters south of Sri Lanka. First, you had really warm seawater, like 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is basically rocket fuel for a storm. Then you had something called low wind shear. And finally, just the natural spin of the earth. Right, so low wind shear, what does that even mean? This is actually a great way to think about it. Imagine you're holding an umbrella in the wind. If the wind is blowing at the same speed down by your feet as it is up by your head, the umbrella stays nice and steady, right? But if the wind up top is way faster, it just rips the umbrella apart. That's what low wind shear is. It meant Ditwah storm clouds could just rise straight up, vertically, building these huge, stable towers that were just waiting to dump all that moisture. And just look at how fast this all happened. On November 26th, it was just a low-pressure area. The very next day, it's a named storm, Ditwah. By the 28th, it's making landfall. And by the 29th, it's already moved on. I mean, it was a brutally fast and efficient storm. But here's the thing. The storm itself, that's only half the story. The rain, sure, that was nature. But the catastrophe? That was amplified by decades of human choices. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was very much a man-made one. So if you look at where the devastation was worst, it was really focused on two main areas. You have the Central Highlands, where the big killers were landslides. And then you have the urban Western Province, around the city of Colombo, where it was just massive, widespread flooding. You got two totally different landscapes, and they were each shaped by two very different sets of human failures. So up in the Highlands, this disaster was literally decades in the making. You had forests being stripped away for plantations, which left the soil totally unstable. Then you had unregulated construction popping up all over these steep hillsides, which just made everything worse. And the most tragic part? The most vulnerable communities, people living in these old colonial-era line rooms, basically barracks for plantation workers, they were right in the path of the more than 1,200 landslides that came crashing down. Meanwhile, down in the cities, it was a totally different story, but the same kind of problem. Natural floodplains and wetlands, the things that are supposed to act like giant sponges and soak up water, they'd been filled in and paved over for development. The drainage systems were ancient and just could not handle this kind of rainfall. So the rivers had nowhere to go. They just turned huge areas like Colombo and Gampaha into inland seas, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. And the damage just rippled out, cascading through every single part of society. I mean, look at this. Agriculture got devastated right in the middle of planting season. Over 20,000 homes were damaged. Key roads and bridges were just gone. Over 1,000 schools were in flood zones. Even hospitals had to be evacuated. The entire system was just underwater. So now, as the waters finally start to go down, the country is at this really critical crossroads. The question isn't just about cleaning up the mess anymore. It's about what you build in its place. And the choice couldn't be more clear. Path number 1, just rebuild everything exactly as it was in the exact same places. Sure, it's the fastest way to get back to normal, but it's also a guaranteed ticket to a repeat disaster. Then there's path 2, to build back better. This is a slower, more careful approach that actually tries to fix the vulnerabilities that Ditwah so brutally exposed. So what does build back better actually mean in practice? Well, it means restoring those natural defenses, like the wetlands that got paved over. It means finally enforcing flood-resistant building codes. It means investing in modern early warning systems and better drainage. And maybe most importantly, it means directly supporting the most vulnerable people with things like cash grants so they can get back on their feet, but on stronger footing this time. And this really is the crucial point of the whole thing. It's so easy to just blame the cyclone. But Cyclone Ditwah didn't create these problems. It just ripped the cover off of them. Prioritizing development over drainage, not enforcing building codes, settling marginalized communities in the absolute riskiest places. These were all choices made over decades. Ditwah was just the event that finally came to collect the bill. And that leaves us with this final, kind of challenging thought. In an era of warming oceans and more extreme weather, storms like this are probably going to become more common. So the single most dangerous thing that Sri Lanka, or really any of us, could do is to just write this off as a freak event, a once-in-a-generation tragedy. Because the real tragedy would be not learning the lesson it's trying to teach us.